Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I should use 2 mics. I don't have one.
Can you try without the mic?
It is a bit echoey. Voice is good enough?
This is better. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I can speak at a good pitch, so perfectly works. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. So, first of all, welcome to CoKarma on behalf of Tarun, and welcome to the event on behalf of TSIC and all of us. Pretty much, I think we have a fantastic speaker today. With your permission. But I just wanted to introduce Shubhankar. Right? I'm sure all of you want to hear from you, and same is the case with me. I'll kind of do a quick intro about him. Sorry about this, but I have to use this. But eventually we'll kind of have a wonderful session where for 10-15 minutes we'll kind of share about his learnings. And after that we'll have a wonderful Q&A where I would go through the questions, but we can source a lot of questions from each of you because I'm sure each of you have some very interesting questions. So Shubhankar is a partner at Foundamental. He comes with over 11 years of investing and operating experience in India, Europe, Middle East and Southeast Asia. Fundamental is a new age global VC firm with offices in Berlin and San Francisco and is focused in construction tech. Anybody in construction tech here?
Or relevant adjacencies.
Okay. And relevant adjacencies such as everything else.
Everything else.
IoT, SaaS, AI, robotics, industrial productivity and automation. Yeah, that pretty much covers everything. So, very interesting thing is also an author of a book. VCs are from Venus, entrepreneurs are from Mars. We'll know more about it. And which opened as a bestseller on Juggernaut app. And prior to that, he was working with K Capital, the leading seed stage VC firm, where he led and managed around 15 startups. Startup investments in SaaS, B2B commerce, healthcare, gaming, fintech. So I'm sure there's a lot to learn with this spectrum of things that he has done in the last 10-15 years. So I think over to you, and then we'll get started with this.
Thank you very much, Praveen, for the introduction. And firstly, thanks all of you for taking time out on a Monday afternoon. Also, a big thanks to Tarun for offering up this lovely space. Also to Tarun of Telangana State Innovation Cell, who I guess is not part of this group today. And to Fani Sama of Redbus and Telangana State Innovation Cell for connecting me with this lovely group and for making this session happen today. So this, consider it more of a placeholder because I was told I definitely need to have a presentation for this session to happen. So this isn't meant to be the primary reason for us having this discussion today. So happy to open up for other topics that may be of interest to you guys. So just a little bit more context to what Praveen said. So I was very fortunate at my time at K to have led 15 investments, as Praveen said. In all about, as of today at least, 9 of them have gone on to raise at least one follow-on round of capital or get acquired by a much larger firm at a healthy return. 4 of those, actually quite a few of them have recently been in the news. Perhaps you know some of these firms, or if you look them up, you'll find mention of them within the last 2 or 3 months perhaps. 4 of them raised money from Sequoia, 2 from Axel Partners, and a few others raised money from Khosla, Media, and so on and so forth. Last year I moved on from K to join Fundamental, a little bit more coming in the next few slides, where while I'm based in Berlin, I lead our investments for India, Southeast Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. And I guess I'm very grateful, apart from many other things, the opportunity at K got me the chance to connect with many influential founders, VCs, and so on. I never knew that a pretty ad hoc meeting in 2016 with Fani Sama, this was not too long after he had sold Redbus, would have eventually led to, for instance, a session like this happening. I think even he didn't know at that time that he would end up being the Chief Innovation Officer for the Telangana government. So moving on, so a little bit more about Foundamental. So we were set up late last year as a $105 million fund with offices, as Praveen mentioned, in Berlin and San Francisco. So we invest, actually I'll provide maybe a little bit more context as we go along. We've so far done 8 investments, including 1 in India, which at this point is unannounced. What I can tell you is it's a co-investment with Sequoia Capital. Again, fortunate to have that relationship from my previous investments. Apart from that, made a few investments in US, Germany, and UK as well. A lot of them are either directly addressing construction workflows and processes in AI, robotics, SaaS, and even logistics. Some of them address it in a very indirect way, and perhaps that's something we can cover in more detail as we go along. So what we define as being relevant for construction doesn't necessarily happen to be related to setting up buildings, for instance. If it offers the potential to replace or disrupt workflows, or even affect the people involved in the construction workflow, depending on what you're doing, it may be a fit for us. Right? So we tend to take a slightly more holistic view, even though at first when you hear construction, you probably are wondering to yourself if there's even any point of me sitting around and listening to what I have to say. So in addition to these 8, as you might imagine, we are looking at quite a few firms around the world. Just throwing off a few tags or sectors, if that makes it easier for you to articulate things. Our current active pipeline, where we're at, I would say, a reasonably high level of interest, includes firms in IoT, robotics, logistics, SaaS, and various kinds of manufacturing and material technologies in different parts of the world. A quick one on, and maybe as I go along, it'll become clear why we tend to take a slightly more broader view on what may affect construction. So some things which I have not mentioned here, I don't know if it's coming up later in our discussion. So we see it, if you do a very high level analysis, and I don't know if this fact surprises you, so construction overall in most markets is between 8 to 12% of the GDP of a country. So for example, in a very fast growing country like ours, in India, it will probably be around 11-12%. In a more mature economy like the ones you see in Europe, it will probably be closer to 7-8%. But all in all, it's actually comparable to financial intermediation or even public transportation in terms of market size. And we believe that what construction exists today is probably where urban transportation was in 2008. Right? Of course, back then, I guess no one, me certainly not, did not foresee just how much money and how much change would be created because of innovations in urban transportation, which of course have gone way beyond just cabs. It also includes innovations in fintech, innovations in how we use GPS technology and location tracking and so on. So we think there's similar ramifications for innovations in this space as well, which kind of prompted us to take a focused but a very deep knowledge approach to this sector when we started up the fund last year. So we believe the innovation, the way it will happen in this space, will happen in 3 waves. Not necessarily in sequence, depending on the geography or the nature of technology involved. They may even happen out of sequence. So the first one we call simple immediate solutions, where you aren't talking about any firm amassing vast amounts of data. This may be a case where either these are existing workflows or existing processes or existing behaviors, which are just very painful to do or consume a ton of time or a ton of manpower, and need some kind of not even disintermediation, perhaps just a bit of a technology layer, where the use case is very easily established, and you just solve it in a less frictionful way. Again, maybe I'll take up examples separately in the interest of time. The next way we foresee happening, I just realized there's some formatting issues with this slide, so please forgive that. Okay, so moving on. So the next way we see is where you start creating and connecting data where either the sources of data didn't exist in the past, or for the first time the data is being digitized and connected to other sources which have some means of either processing it or making it actionable in a workflow or for a transaction. Right? One example that I can quote from our portfolio, for instance, is our first investment, a second investment firm called Foundamental, which solves the problem for, I don't know what is actually happening on site. Is this person really there? Is he really doing what he claims to be doing? Does what actually exists in a certain part of the site? So the way it solves for that is by creating a 360-degree imaging solution, which provides a single point of truth through imaging and video at all points of time on site. So that's an example where actually that data source didn't even exist to begin with, although the use case and the friction is established. So that's something we see as, let's say, what we call the wave 2 of innovation and of opportunity in this space. The third layer is orchestrated economy. I think rather than trying to describe this, I guess the way we think of through analogy is to see how large technology and consumer-centric plays sort of get funneled into your Facebooks, Amazons, and Netflixes and Googles of the world. So we see something similar happening. Now, depending on the market context and the use case, that this may not happen for the next few years or maybe even the next decade, but perhaps as we go further and further along, with wave 1 and wave 2, and as certain firms emerge who have to control all these workflows and data sources, we see more and more of them becoming powerful repositories of information and controlling workflows. And for a startup, that also means that's a potential acquirer for you outside of just traditional VC money or whatever money is available in the public markets. Yeah, and this at a high level is how we see it playing out. Is data drives transparency, drives control of workflows, and drives customer decisions. So certain pieces of this puzzle, or in certain cases, none of these may be available. In certain cases, certain parts of the puzzle may not exist, in which case they each enable a certain layer of how we see this happening, which is why in our view it's an orchestrated economy where each successful or successive layer unlocks additional productivity, additional way of synergies and the way for the economy to function, kind of like the way an orchestra would, with a band both coming together. Yeah, so I think that's all I had for this precursor, I guess, to our discussion. So again, I repeat, this doesn't necessarily have to set the context for other questions that you may have in mind. Happy to take a more broader view if that helps with what you guys are working on right now.
You wanted to give some examples
For?
The construction, I think that you said that you will give some examples.
So for instance, sorry, could you be more specific with your question?
I don't remember the one, but
There was some...
The wave 1. The wave example for wave 1.
So each of your waves is kind of giving a better example to understand it. What do you mean?
Okay. So for wave 1, right, one problem which exists today is there's a ton of paper on site, right, and all which today exists not just in construction, in most people-rich industries and people-rich sectors, in India especially, but also in many other parts of the world.
healthcare.
Sorry?
Healthcare would be a good example.
No, actually healthcare is a little bit better. So the worst off here would be construction, retail, hospitality, logistics. Logistics has actually improved quite a bit, as I'm sure you guys are aware. But had you asked the question 5 years ago, logistics was also very, very paper and pen based, right? But retail and hospitality are very much so even today, right? For that matter, even agriculture, even today, it's very paper and pen based in terms of how information is transmitted, how transactions happen even today. So if you go and tell a stakeholder in the system or a business owner that, hey, you know what, I will digitize all the paper involved in your processes and allow you to access information which is stored somewhere in paper, people accept that immediately. Now it's a different matter, especially in certain markets, they may not be ready to pay the price for the software, right? Or you may see friction from the end users, the actual blue-collar workers or the frontline staff, for instance. But does the pain point exist? Yes. Do you need to make a massive behavior change? No, right? And does a way exist to capture the data today in some shape or form? We believe yes, that is pen and paper, but how do you make it accessible in a way which unlocks efficiency? So in our definition, although that's not the only definition or the only example, but that's a simple example to give in this space, for instance, right? And an example of wave 3 would be, so I'll use the example of the very last name you see here. It's an unannounced deal where it optimizes construction projects. So when I say construction projects, it of course extends to other projects as well. So we also do stuff for oil and gas and civil projects, for example. So the idea there is to interface with many other solutions providers which keep a tab on manpower, on procurement of materials, and historic information on how certain workflows, when they happen in certain sequences and based on the times they take, it can proactively tell you how to plan your project and sequence it in tandem with other workflows going on in your project, for example. So this is something where you need every part of the value chain to have access to sufficient data and be able to process and act upon it, right? So we believe this is an example, and of course, as you may imagine, with anything that fits what we call wave 3, you need many different parts of the puzzle to be developed. So in some ways, it's a punt from our side that all these things will be fleshed out in more detail and with sufficient maturity as we go along.
So I think we'll do one thing actually, we'll have a pretty interactive session. So just wanted to understand what is the background of all of you so that the discussion can be made more relevant. So how many are working on your startups? Yeah. Wow. So we have quite a few startups.
Yes.
Okay. And how about the rest? Are you from the enabler community or are you just from the enabler community or that? Anybody else from other backgrounds? You're working with other bigger companies? Okay. So what do you want to hear from Shubhankar in the Q&A? What questions or what themes would you be interested in?
I would like to know, for example, if you identify construction as an opportunity in India, what other potential opportunities domain-wise lie in India? I'm sure you explored and ignored and moved ahead. So,
Do you mean, are you asking me in general what exists in India, or what, for instance, I or Foundamental would be interested in?
no, general, like what other opportunities you probably would have?
I would throw the question back at you. Is there anything which doesn't have opportunity to build?
And why wouldn't you have put that, pick that up over construction?
Okay, so I can take that up as a question during the discussion.
Yeah, okay. And how many are looking for investments here? Okay. So feel free to So yeah, let's get started with the panel and how.
Should I close this thing or?
I have one question.
Yeah,
Sure.
just cover all the questions.
So in the 3 slides, one is about dealing with the data, capturing the data. And when the data is captured, currently it needs to be validated. There will be local components depending on the market, what is the region.
Yeah.
So is it also part of that particular
So when you
deviated?
can you contextualize this perhaps with an anecdote or an example? Because in very abstract terms, it is hard to answer your question with in a way that might I don't know, answer it clearly.
So maybe it's just divide this because I don't know anything about construction
Sure.
industry. They may be in a construction industry.
And sorry, for everyone's benefit, would you mind speaking up a little louder?
Actually, yeah, use only something has to be used. I think it's
in a construction industry, of course, I just take some example for the sake of this.
Sure.
There might be a local lab where settlement workers should not be there after 5 p.m.
Okay.
To schedule that. Now, you are telling that there might be 360 degrees camera that can capture the data.
Yeah.
And whenever I need it, I can watch it. So, there may be multiple things in a construction industry. These are the local labs. So, in your workflow, is there anything that actually identifies what violations are, potential violations in terms of the local compliance, and if you can trigger it is not going to correct?
So good question. Let me try and answer this one with specific examples using, for instance, the capability of our portfolio firm that I just spoke about. For example, if there is such a law that doesn't allow not just female employees, maybe anyone else, to work after 5 p.m., but there is footage showing that they are there, then perhaps someone is responsible for allowing that violation to happen. Maybe the supervisor, right? Which then can be traced with another digitized solution, non-paper based hopefully, which showed who actually approved this work order. If there is no such approved work order, still it's the supervisor who has to accept responsibility. The other possibility again is someone claiming to be at site, maybe a male employee, but actually not there. So you can also catch lies, which is a major cause of productivity losses and pilferage today. Again, not just in India, but all over the world. Lying on these widespread sites where there is no supervision or very difficult to supervise these things. for example?
I think probably after that. So basically, there's another company that I know. What they do is, especially around these buildings, everyone kind of crosses the boundaries, right? So the GHMC boundaries or the governments and regulations. So a lot of these drone companies are now kind of going in within like few hours. They circle out the whole area, and based on the data, they already have figures integrated with the government, saying where order slips will be generated in terms of who is offsetting the things and who is actually doing mistakes. Based on that, challan and everything are being created. So there's a lot of activity happening around this case.
So this controllership triggers, like what are violations? So would it be part of the workflow through your chain, so that integrates these kind of actions? Your supervisor is taking action.
Possibly yes, although I suspect we are getting too deep into this very specific use case. I'm not sure if the rest of the audience is appreciating this discussion.
Okay.
Maybe
let's get back.
If they do, we'll carry on.
I think I'll be the bad guy for today. So we'll have a good conversation. By the way, I think I forgot to introduce myself completely. I'm Praveen Dharma. I run a social network for startup ecosystem, Startup Byte, that's what it's called. Anyways, that's not the focus, but I'll stop there. But first and foremost, I think all of you have a pretty cool picture of what a venture capitalist is, right? So all of this thing that you have all the time, all the money in life, everything is pretty chilled out, right? Everyone wants to go behind them, run behind them. So we wanted to kind of understand from their end, right? How is it in the life of a VC and what are the challenges that you typically go through on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, I think you'll have to probably contextualize this also with which stage the fund itself is in, because that also changes, materially changes what we do in a typical day. So for example, in our case where we are today right now, Foundamental, it's less than a year old. We've made a few investments, but as you can imagine, not too much time goes in portfolio management today, given the relatively few investments we have done. So a lot of the time is on deal sourcing and hunting around and expanding our network of all kinds of prospects. Could be startups, could be other VCs, could be anyone else who's an enabler, right, for us. So for me, this is one such trip where I'm covering, for instance, Delhi, Bangalore, and Hyderabad, and then off to Southeast Asia as well, right? So sourcing, partnership development, if that's a term to be called, developing various kinds of channels and partnerships, working on building expertise in various subdomains and niches and business models. Of course, interacting with our own team. We have more junior members in the team who need support, and holding them as well. Although to be fair, VC firms usually tend to be very light on resources, and compared to most other industries, it usually is people hunting by themselves. That's usually how it functions. So it's less about people management or leadership in the traditional sense. The aspect of leadership, which perhaps matters more in our industry, is taking accountability and having the quote-unquote guts to make a decision if others are not excited about the firm, which especially is true if you're an early-stage investor, like seed.
I think how many of you really understand what VC firms are? Just want to get a context because you do. I think probably can you just give a broader context as well because
sure.
I know you're putting out a lot of terms.
Okay, my apologies. Yeah. Okay, cool. So for instance, the people who manage the investment process and make the investment decisions, we are collectively called the general partners, or in our industry, the jargon is GP, right? We go out in the market to raise money from various people who would like to invest in our fund, which are called, and these people are called limited partners, right? The reason they are limited is in some ways comes from the way a limited liability firm is defined. So their liability is limited to the extent of the amount that they choose to invest in our fund. Important thing compared to, for instance, more stable instruments like mutual funds, debt instruments, etc. It is very well known to these limited partners that this is super high risk asset class. They may not get anything back, right? But if we do very well, they may get a lot of money back. For your information, most VC funds also do not tend to make a positive return. So in other words, if 100 VC firms are out there, more than 50 firms or less than 50 firms will actually return something more than the initial principal invested, right? And in terms of a VC firm's business model, if as a limited partner you invest, I don't know, let's say 100 rupees into a firm, the way the business model works is we charge a management fee, kind of similar to how a mutual fund manager will charge you management fee for managing your assets. And also we take a share of the profits earned, which in our industry is called carry. Or we call it carried interest or profit share, carry, all these things mean more or less the same thing. Right? So our incentive is, and if you're wondering, hey, okay, it sounds like a very cool business model where you get to use someone else's money and punt it away and also get paid to do that. So the thing is, for better or worse, it's not something that runs into perpetuity. So each fund has a limited amount of capital and limited duration. So if you do a terrible job at it, so no one's going to invest again when you come back for a second fund. Which is also why most VC funds usually don't go past their first fund. So if a firm, if you're looking at VC firms and you hear that they've raised a second fund or a third fund or a fourth fund, it usually is a sign that either they have delivered very good returns in their early funds, or B, their investors or limited partners somehow have a lot of faith in them. Both of which, of course, are very positive signs.
So I think that sets the context for all of you, right? Because a lot of them confused between angel investors versus venture capitalists, and they keep hitting all of them, hoping that they'll get investment from one or the other person. But as Shubhankar said, there's a time limit and they have a fund size.
Yeah.
Based on that, you need to actually go check who are the right people and what are the industries they're focusing on, because they have to deliver a kind of ROI in a given period of time. So,
how about idea stage?
So it depends.
Idea stage funding?
It depends. So both in my past, while I was at K, as well as in my current role. So in my current role, I personally haven't led an idea stage firm just yet, although we are actively evaluating some as we speak. In my past, we have invested in an idea stage firm, and if you make a good pick, it can actually be a breakthrough. So by all means, that doesn't of course mean, for instance, universally a VC firm will invest in any idea stage firm. Speaking on behalf of at least the firms I've represented and most VC firms that I know in India. So for instance, any VC firm will usually look at a combination of team, market size, how much comfort they have around the business model, any proxies of unfair advantage. If you come to them in idea state, that means you're zero on traction. So you need to actually do an excellent job of selling the opportunity in terms of team, business model, and unfair advantage. If you score very high there, by all means you can raise money. I have invested myself in such firms, and if you make good picks, it can be a tremendous opportunity. And VCs know that. So by the way, I don't know if that was going to be a follow-up question. If you know that a VC firm does very early stage, idea stage investments, and they tell you in spite of that they don't do idea stage investments, one way you can communicate that you are really savvy about the process is to counter-question them. What do you think might be missing, or what would have prompted you to not necessarily invest, because then you'll be putting them on the spot, at least to take a harder look at the opportunity. Or B, if you believe you're too early because we're idea stage, what do you think we need to achieve in order for you to look at us seriously? So most firms, even though they may, and I don't know if you've heard any of this before, so at least in my past I've heard it myself as well, even though they tell you they don't look at idea stage, you'll find in most cases, most VC firms, both in India and elsewhere in the world, they at least have a few idea stage investments. So you should not accept that on face value and just move away.
So when you say idea stage, you mean seed?
No, so what is traditionally defined as seed is usually more than just idea stage. So when I say idea stage, which I'm presuming is what you meant, 1 or 2 or 3 or as many number of founders you are, have an idea. Nothing else has been done. Maybe the firm has been incorporated and nothing else.
It's like the best shot ever. If you can actually get funded
at
that stage. But ideally, that's not the common now. But beyond that, when you talk about on an average, in terms of the general startups, when should they even start looking at the VC firm? What is the baseline that kind of set what you expect when startups start practicing?
Look, so again, depends a great deal on everyone's situation in life and their ambition levels. My suggestion, which I actually learned many years later over a period of time, if you are contemplating starting up, it's actually not a bad idea even before you start up to reach out to people you trust and respect, right? Not because if they tell you certain things, it's a guarantee that they'll fund you. Because if that's your motivation, it may be a terrible decision to make, right? And I just described the structure of a VC firm. None of us are actually in a position to guarantee anything. At the end of the day, we represent a partnership that reports to our LPs. So we are answerable to all of those things, right? So I want you also to remember that. So quite often when we reject a proposal, we get less than polite replies. So also do remember that it's not a personal decision. We are all answerable to someone else, right? We are not. If you are all angel investors, it might have been different. We write our personal checks. We don't answer to anyone. But it's definitely not the case in a VC firm. So now coming back to the original question. So if you have the time and you have, let's say, depending on your situation in life, you're either doing something professionally or whatever it is, and you have this idea which you want to work on and start a firm. If you know VCs or know people who can connect you to VCs, it may not be a bad idea to reach out right away. Not for formal funding, mind you, which a lot of people also do, even before they've started the firm, even pre-idea stage, right? Going and reaching out for funding, which I personally never fund. I find that actually a conflict of interest because it's not appropriate representation of risk and reward. Somebody hedging, it's an example of someone trying to hedge their risk before even taking any risk. So, but it's a good way to validate whether other people who have seen other opportunities or who have looked at the market or have more resources to examine certain markets agree with your view when you're about to start up. So if you can, not a bad idea to talk even before you start up. Once you start up, so let's say once you decide to start up, actually this applies even before, but one thing you have to be careful when you talk to VCs. You still have to, at the end of the day, which is part of being an entrepreneur, you are your own boss. So what you need to be careful about is you need to establish a balance between incorporating feedback, hopefully helpful and informed feedback, versus just randomly swaying based on what some VCs are saying. Because that is also very destructive, because you may be just getting feedback based on whatever is hot or whatever is cool in that season, right? And you may be either too late or misinformed based on what that particular VC investor's biases are. So at the end of the day, remember, you are accountable still for your own decisions. Use that as an input, but don't give up your ownership of the decision you make. So that's what I'm saying.
So typically, like startups are reaching out to VC funds. What is the kind of dilution should they expect in terms of ratings and not in terms of exactly?
Sure.
Because a lot of them are always confused in terms of how much they dilute when I'm approaching.
Sure. So we're talking, of course, about Indian funds, I guess, right? And at seed stage?
Yeah, so I think most of the VCs usually don't come at seed stage, if I understand.
No, that's not really the case. No, they'll tell you that, but that's not really the case. They do enough, or most of them do enough seed stage deals as well, right? So if you were to,
Probably based on the stage.
yeah, I think you had a question. Sorry.
What stage do you see?
Oh, sorry, you asked me that question. I didn't answer it. Sorry, yeah. So coming back to that question, so what you typically call seed is, let's say the founders have quit their jobs, they're already full-time in their venture. They may have some employees, usually not a big number, can be as little as one more employee other than the founders. They have started doing something on the business, maybe pre-revenue or maybe very little revenue. How little doesn't really matter, but there is some semblance that there is a product in a very raw form also exists. Maybe with revenue, without revenue, right? These are usually the bulk of where seed stage firms lie. In some outlier cases, you may find seed stage firms with even more than $1 crore or two in per month in revenue, right? Which would be an outlier. It is not to be treated as a representative example of what a seed deal is supposed to look like. A typical seed deal will have some small revenues, but that's not a filter. It's totally fine to be pre-revenue as long as some work has been done on the product, some work has been done on fleshing out the value proposition, who your clients are, maybe doing some market dipsticks with your clients as well. May or may not be with revenue.
3 to 4 questions. Should I tell them out all at once?
I don't know, man. He's the moderator.
No, I think pick your questions because I think we'll have it's not a monologue. So just
I think when we're getting started, I think as an investor, we are just 1 or 2 co-founders, and that's a big partner that is coming. So probably the entrepreneurs expect a lot more than money.
Okay.
So if you select Y Combinator, there are specific things that they bring in or some other fund. I wanted to know specifically Foundamental, what do you guys bring on the table?
Sure. So good question. So I'll give you a few different points so far, or based on what we have seen and what our hypothesis was on our value proposition. So one is in terms of our industry focus and the sectors we look at. If you do fall into one of those sectors or the adjacencies as we call it, you know that you get someone who's focused, and therefore not because we were born experts, but simply by the virtue of by being focused on these sectors, we have a better understanding of these specific plays or how these other plays can interact with other kinds of firms in the market. So that I would call out as one value proposition. Our LP includes the second largest building materials firm in the world, also which offers up access to other kinds of plays in let's say the construction and adjacent plays. So for example, we can also facilitate introductions through our LP or limited partner as I just described. The third,
construction is that
again, so the extent to which I can contextualize that depends on specific examples, right? Which we can cover in maybe offline, right? And then third, each of us individually in the partnership or the GPs representing Foundamental, we each come with our own network of investors, founders, and influencers, let's say as well. So for example, the reason I'm sitting here in front of you today is because I got very lucky in knowing Funny Sama Partners, right? It's not something that Foundamental gave me, but I'm very grateful for that connection, right? So each of us similarly represent powerful networks in our own local ecosystems, which our portfolio companies possibly have access to, right? In the past, I've also raised money for K Capital, have access to influential people, for instance, in India. And lastly, actually not lastly, there are a few other points as well, but let me stop right here. Because we are a global firm and each of us looks at multiple markets, for instance, I look at India, Southeast Asia, and Australia, we can enable market access, introductions, market expansion, which depending on what you do, and we need not dive into specific examples right now, may be a critical aspect of what you're doing. Maybe you're not targeted at the Indian market, for instance, right? Maybe it is crucial for you to go to the US. That is easier for a firm like us to do than a traditional Indian-only VC investor.
Quick question. We are a startup and we are actually bootstrapped totally. And we have come out with a hardware solution which is very different from the traditional market solution. And in the recent past, we got some publication in 42 and all those magazines. So we got actually some of the investors actually approached us, we did approach them, they kind of reached out to us.
Sure.
Wipro was one of them, Wipro Consumer Care and Snapdeal and Redmi phones, the Xiaomi investor.
Sure.
Yeah, so they have approached us and they asked us about our business model, how much sales we do, how much profit it is, and all those kind of stuff. So we kind of are already profitable. We are 1 year in operation. Now, the question that we actually have is, we are totally bootstrapped and we were thinking that, we're looking at last year versus this year, we might probably do at least 2x sales easily this year.
Sure.
Okay, probably 2x or 3x with our own funds. But with those people talking to us and they are talking about buying some equity in our company, so we suddenly started seeing that probably with that money we can do probably 7-8x sales as compared to last year what we have done.
Yeah.
So number one, the big Wipro is a big company, Wipro, Consumer Care is a big company, Snapdeal, all this, Xiaomi is a big company.
Yeah.
Number one question that we are having is, are they just sniffing and trying to get information, or are they really serious investors? I don't know. Today we are halfway through that discussions with them, with all these 3-4 guys.
Sure.
So are they just sniffing and just knowing it, or will it really culminate? Or is sniffing for investors a common thing? number one. Number two, if it comes to dilution of our equity and really growing our company very fast, if we get money out, we are sure that we'll be able to do it much faster than what we can do with our own money.
Sure.
How do we decide the dilution? Because the ticket size they have already told us. At least Snapdeal has told that they not invest more than 1 to 1.2 crore in a company like us.
Sure.
But they are not told how much dilution. So we have to decide what dilution. So how do you decide on that dilution? So these two questions. Are they sniffing? Is first question.
Sure.
Are they serious? Sniffing is the first question. Second is how do we decide on dilution?
Good. Okay, so let me contextualize or try to contextualize based on what you told me, and also try to lay out a more generic framework perhaps which others can benefit from. So going by your example, not quoting any names in particular, but saying that investors reached out to you for whatever reason, right? So presumably there is certain aspects to your business or your team or your model or something that you're doing that appeals to them, which you should ask, right? A lot of people, and I've been guilty of that myself, so it's not like calling it as black. We get starstruck just because we are talking to VCs. Typically, remember, we are also answerable to others. We are also trying to just eke out a living, so to speak. So, if they are reaching out to you based on what you perceive to be merits to what you're doing, ask them what it is, right? One way, a very simple way, which is a sales tactic, to gauge that how serious they are in terms of intent, is to get information from them on what they like about your business and how important or valuable you are to them, right? Also, and depending on how much leverage you have in the discussion, based on what you see in terms of bargaining power and who else they're talking to, try to find out what else are their options, if not you, right? If they're not, they don't seem, or they only seem half interested in all of them, perhaps they're just sniffing them, right? If they have very definite answers to provide for, let's say, why they're talking to you, why they reached out to you, their views on your competition, on what their other options might look like, then usually those are signs that they might be interested. Now that by itself doesn't mean that if they're interested, that they're also not going to be predatory, right? Which of course comes into the second aspect. Now look, I have not investigated your business, so I don't know what to value it at. In general, depending on what your ambitions are, and there's nothing wrong with taking a strategic investment, for instance, which, let's say, allows the strategic investor to take majority control. It's a totally fine option and there's nothing wrong with that. It'll allow you a very effective way of cashing out and give you certainty for the future. If you have greater ambitions though, of being in control or let's say controlling how fast you grow, you may want to take a minority investment, which is the first thing to clarify. If you're talking to large firms which are of a more strategic nature and typically less of a financial nature. Now, if you're talking to financial investors, and again, this is not describing all the cases, answering the question you had, Praveen. So in India, at seed stage, if you were to plot it on a graph, you'll find that the bell curve, the median is usually around 20 to 30% dilution at seed stage. That doesn't mean deals don't happen with just 10% dilution, they do. And deals also happen with 40% dilution, right? But most deals will happen in 20 to 30% dilution because it allows the lead investor in the round enough skin in the game. It creates enough motivation to take a board seat and play an active role and not be an extremely tiny investor who has no interest whatsoever in what you're doing and for whom it's a very small position, but also allows you as a founder or group of founders to maintain control over the firm, right? If you are giving up control, make sure you're getting something in return, right? What I've seen, which is, I guess is it's maybe a traditional Indian view, but also one which I see in particular for some reason happening a great deal in Hyderabad of all the metropolitan cities, is the view that investors want to come in some majority ownership capacity. So I guess if that is happening, just ask yourself what you're getting in return for giving up control. If you're getting nothing, then you should question why you're giving up control.
So that's for the seed stage, that if you go for a Series A or a jump kind of thing.
So in India typically, which is a very much India-centric thing, I would say. Now Britain, of course, depends a great deal on the circumstances of the firm and where they are. But again, in Series A, it's usually 20 to 30% dilution. Usually. Bridge can be as little as, I don't know, maybe 5% or some single digits to, again, maybe 20% or so. But bridge is a much wider domain. Because usually bridge rounds will be done by existing investors who are not really working on taking a new ownership stake. It's just slightly enhancing their existing stake. So it's less diluted, or supposed to be less diluted than a traditional seed or series round.
So, we were earlier talking about what goes in the day-to-day domains of VC, right?
Yeah.
So, last part involves saying no.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
How good have you gotten there? Rather, what did you do to become better, right? That was the first question.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is it's a little more self-serving feeling. In the construction type of built world as such, what are the trends or any insights you can share on the intersection of the electrical energy infra with this construction?
Very nice. Okay.
We work in that space. I would like to have any free insights.
Cool. So I'll talk about 2 or 3 models in particular that I've looked at in this region, energy. But before that, I'll answer the first question. So to be honest, whether we are saying no in a sincere, empathetic and kind way, we only come to know in the future. It's impossible to know that in the present. I think what I can say, which I'm very happy and grateful for. So if, let's say in the future, you as an investor get deal referrals from people you say no to, that's usually a very good sign that at least you didn't piss them off and they think highly of you. So to give you an example of the deals, for instance, I spoke about, there is a firm which was my second last deal that I led from Cape, and until I quit, I was on the board of the firm. It's a firm called Zetwork. It was very recently in the news as having raised a 9 million round from Axel and Sequoia. So that deal was referred to me by a founder, also from Hyderabad, who I had said no to. Right? So I guess I'm very grateful to him for sending a deal my way, which ended up and which might end up becoming the biggest success thus far of my investing career. Right? So, which is why I think, and I think the way I describe in my book is a no doesn't mean a rejection, right? So, I think it's important to remember, which we quite often forget, and VCs are also very guilty of it, is that the tables can turn very effectively or very dramatically, right? So, to always remember to be kind and remember the other person, you could be working or be reporting to that person in the future. To give you an example, back in 2013, I pitched to this gentleman at Sequoia when I was an entrepreneur, and he said no, obviously. But the whole discussion was conducted with tremendous dignity, and I felt I had a clear understanding of what I need to get to be ready to pitch to him, going back to your question from the past. Of course, it's a different matter, we never got to that stage and shut shop before that. But a year or so later, when I joined K Capital, within the first week, I had a meeting with that guy, right? And in fact, even 3 deals that I did at K, he was the counterpart from Sequoia. And even in my first deal from Foundamental, he is my counterpart again in Sequoia. Would I have known all of this in 2013? No way. But the one way, the very kind and empathetic way in which he said no to me, gave me conviction that this is a guy, if I ever become an investor, not that I knew at that time I would switch to VC, but I knew at that time this is a guy worth being in touch with and working with in the future. So I can say, from being on the other side, that's an effective endorsement of how, if people still want to work with you, people still want to give you deal referrals and think of you as a well-wisher, that's usually a very positive sign. And now coming to your second question, so in terms of energy, off the top of my head, right, applications we have seen. So
Energy and also the electrical infra that goes into it.
Sure, cool. So I'm a big fan, especially in India and Indonesia, for the trucking space and the opportunities and the adjacencies it has with construction, which is why the first investment I've led for us is an investment in the trucking space in India. So another opportunity which we haven't invested in for your information, but we like the firm a lot, but there were other details which we stumbled upon. It's a firm which, apart from offering logistics services, also offers electric trucks and an ecosystem for charging electric trucks. Now you may be wondering, why is that such a big deal? So the insight that came out is, if you go to the Delhi NCR region, and I'm sure all of you know, both during Diwali and during 2 weeks in January, the thing is kind of shut because of the smog and the pollution crisis there. And the effect that has had in the Delhi NCR market, because of which it also extends in some parts of Punjab and Rajasthan and so on, is construction activities banned. Right? Why? Because the construction activity is facilitated by diesel trucks which carry raw material. And so they found that if you keep constructing post-Diwali, all these diesel trucks may intensify the smog a great deal. So in some ways, you cannot, if you want to continue doing business in either the material supplies or the procurement or construction or demolition, or anything to do with diesel in Delhi, you're doomed, right? The writing is on the wall, right? I of course can't share numbers, but the numbers just plummet in November and January. So if I don't know, for instance, what business you are in, but that's an example, for instance, even which extends to many other industries. But for the purpose of the industries I'm looking at, diesel trucks is not the future, right? So you need a way to electrify trucks, right? So that's one very high-level thing I saw, for instance. Another application, which, by the way, could extend to places like Hyderabad, Bangalore, Mumbai. So today we may not have a crisis just after Diwali, but maybe it's in store for us in the future. So where all of us need to switch to electric trucks, right? That's an example. Another thing I've seen is around insulation and heating of homes, and what it takes to actually keep homes either warm or sufficiently cool, right? So a lot of it is driven by burning of fossil fuels, right? It is perhaps less seen in India because we are not a very insulation-heavy market, and as of now, at least, air conditioning, while we have consumed a lot of air conditioning in our country, in terms of a percentage penetration, it's still relatively low. But as it intensifies, again, the carbon footprint is tremendous, right? Either from air conditioning or from boiler units to supply insulation, which is the case, for instance, in colder nations. So there, an opportunity exists, for instance, to electrify the whole thing and to make the process of either heating or cooling our built spaces in a more sustainable way, right? I'm sure there are other opportunities, but drawing a blank just right now.
So what excites see in startup? So what are your, is it the scale, is it the idea, is it the market size? What is?
Yeah, so I'll go back to answering what I answered for your previous question. So at least for me, usually there are, I think, 4 dimensions. It's the team, the unfair advantage, which unfair advantage can have many different facets. Market size, either the business model or the potential for this business model to kind of become a dominant play. Usually I look at businesses along those lines. Of course, as you may imagine, with an evaluation of this sort, it is a highly subjective evaluation, right? And again, I have got it wrong quite a few times, I've got it right sometimes.
And in Fundamental, is it focused on the technology firms or is it not firms?
We are open to looking at both, but for instance, if technology isn't, at least in your own assessment, not a core part of what you offer, you will have to separately figure out a way, more than answering to us, answering to yourself, how this is going to scale in a very disproportionate fashion, right? Because not just us, any VC, what we look for is like tremendous outsized returns that A will make us rich, and B will look very good when we talk about it in sessions like this, right? People find it less exciting to talk about firms which are growing at 30% year over year, for instance, which are tremendous cash flow businesses for founders of such companies, but which don't make for great conversation topics in sessions like this.
Can you answer on that? Why do you guys pick construction?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So your original question was which are where the opportunity exists. That I can say for with certainty opportunity exists everywhere, right? Until last year I used to evaluate early stage opportunities in pretty much every sector in India. Not just tech, by the way. Even we had led investments in my previous firm in consumer brands, right? So I can say even there, for instance, opportunities of disproportionately scaling fast and making very exciting returns exist. Right? Bira is an example of that, for instance. Now, why did we pick construction? So I think, so I'll answer first for my own motivation outside of, for instance, what if you talk to our LPs or others, what they'll say. So one thing which I sort of started noticing around 2017 was quite a few focused funds started emerging in India. It of course was a phenomenon existing in the US for a while, but in India, for instance, there are funds focused only on investing in offline food and beverage brands, for example, or only investing in AI, or only investing in enterprise SaaS startups. And you'll be quite surprised, or maybe it doesn't surprise you, that usually they end up doing better returns than a generalist VC fund, right? And if the reason is not very obvious to you, maybe I'll just tell you what my reading on the situation is. So if you take the effort of calling out and saying, hey, you know what, I am focused on FMCG startups. All of the best FMCG startups are likely to come to you. Now, if FMCG as an industry tanks, then the fund is of course doomed, right? But if FMCG as a space, or at least new innovations in FMCG go big, then you will actually have a very good return because your failure rate will be very low. The sector will go up, and you will have a pick. You will have less competitive pressure. You will not have to throw down money in order to win the best deals, so to speak. So for me personally, and if you're wondering, so I went from investing in fintech and gaming and so on. Obviously, from that point of view, I was like, dude, are you serious? Construction, right? So that was my first reaction, right? But then when I took a step back and also decided to put my analytical hat on. So for instance, I asked myself, if I was back in 2008, what kind of investor would I be in order to get the best returns, the most visibility, and the most high profile? Everyone would want to talk to me. And the answer is clearly urban transportation, right? If I'd even ignored every other space out there, not looked at fintech, no, all of the best ones had. So look, so Healthcare and 1mg, even though they started off as solo founder outfits, they originally were two founders in each. So I would not really call it a solo founder at first. No, at least, and maybe it's a bias based on what I have seen or what I have done. But if possible, I would prefer a firm with multiple founders rather than a single founder. But I'm not close to the idea. Yeah.
Why is founders are relevant?
So, unless you're a superhuman, you're likely to have some gaps in your functional capabilities or in your network of connections you offer, or even in what skill sets and experiences you bring, right? At a very simple level, most days running a startup will be unsuccessful and frustrating for you. It is very handy to have someone else to discuss that and counsel you, rather than sort of drown your sorrows in frustration, right?
How about there's a team of directors with experience?
If they look, so I think it all looks good on paper. What I will caution you against is they will not actually go to the field to get clients for you, for instance. They will not spend days in your office without a salary, for instance. They will not go to investor meetings and pitch on your behalf. And they will certainly not give up their jobs to you. So that should tell you a lot about who is giving up what and who has what stakes on the table. So they add a certain value, but they are not a replacement for a founder. Another thing I want to add is, especially if you are working on a startup which has a geographical scaling aspect to it, or where the geographical scaling also has a business or enterprise selling aspect, there is a very meaningful limitation to what you can do if you're a single founder, right? And for instance, I'll urge you to look at successful Indian founders who have scaled to the US, for instance, right? It usually demands, they kind of get stuck in this loop if you're a solo founder. Hey, if I'm the solo founder, do I stay in India or do I stay in the US, right? If I stay in India, who do I trust enough or who's capable enough to go to the US? If I go to the US, who leads my team in India, right? All these are non-trivial questions which are very difficult to answer if you don't have a co-founder, but very easy to resolve if you have a co-founder who's capable and who you trust.
So ideal is if we have a right co-founder.
Yeah.
But there are controversies within the founders as well which happen.
Yeah, so you shouldn't add a co-founder just for the sake of adding a co-founder. That's worse than being solo, right? Which is why I added the aspect of trust, right? It's not just the capability on paper.
So yeah, please.
A few days back, I was with a group of people and we were discussing about raising funds.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys said that okay, don't make a detailed presentation, make a single page flat and give it to the VC. And then, will you consider a single page flat to invest your money in or not?
Let's put it in a broader context. So,
it
what
was
do you
very-
prefer somebody approaching you?
No, I think that's not his question. Yeah, that's not his question.
So it was actually related to coaching because when we were talking about, okay, if VC comes in and then we discuss the product to him or her, and now that guy has a lot of money and maybe other connections also, maybe they'll take the idea and then execute it somewhere else. So if you get a single page flag, so what would be going on in your mind? That would it interest you or not?
So I'm going verbatim based on what you said. A single page flyer is not going to be enough for me to invest money into your firm.
Yeah.
Might be enough to pique my interest, yes, but then it can't just end there as like a one pager and then you don't help me at all with any other information, right? At some level, either you'll have to figure out if you can trust me or what you'll need to do to trust me, or find other sources in the ecosystem who can help you. For instance, let's say if you're talking to me, you should do your, and I invite you, do your own diligence on me, for instance, or my firm, and figure out if we are credible enough. Right? If not, you should take your own informed decision. Is what I would urge you to do and urge everyone to do, for instance. So, sorry, we're stealing all of your time.
No, as long as everyone is enjoying the discussion.
What do we need to do to get ourselves ready for Series A?
Sorry, get what on thing?
What do we need to do to get ourselves ready as an entrepreneur for Series A?
So, look, I think that question has a few dangerous connotations to it. So maybe I'll first, I'll caution you, and I don't know if that's where you were headed. So it has undertones. What you just said, it has undertones of, hey, what do I need to do to get investor money?
That's not what I meant.
That's not what you meant, but it has undertones of
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which is just to clarify, if that's the way you think, which by the way a lot of us think, and all entrepreneurs have to have a survival and a money-raising mindset. It is part of the resource-constrained environment, but it also you run the risk of pandering to what a VC says instead of doing what you originally set out to do, right? So, for example, let's say, I'll take my own example for instance. So when we started my venture in the diamonds and diamond jewelry space, our vision was to first build out an intelligent analytics-led pricing and recommendation engine for diamonds and diamond jewelry, which interesting enough doesn't exist even today, by the way, right? So it would have been a meaningful differentiator even today. But the VCs we met early on said, hey, you know what, come back to us when you have X amount of rupees in revenue a month. So we're like, okay, you know what, that is what investors are looking for. They don't really care for all these things we have in mind about analytics and all that stuff. So we put that aside. Okay, we actually never got to completing it. So we focused all our efforts on marketing and all that stuff. But then all that ended up happening was we just look just like the other sites out there, right? So then we couldn't answer the other most meaningful question is how are you differentiated, right? Which is why I'm cautioning you. Don't get carried away based on what you're hearing from one or even a few investors. You should still be able to answer to what you originally set out to do. And you'll find that if you are satisfactorily doing what you wanted to do and scaling up there, it'll turn around. A lot of VCs who understand things and who have sufficient level of insights to offer, they'll come back to you and do it, chase you without you having to chase them, right? Now, in terms of, let's assume that you didn't actually ask me those questions with the undertones I just brought up, and it is a more transparent exchange that you're seeking in how to become more intelligent, in how to solicit interest. It is what I answered to her, for instance, during our early interactions, or even, for instance, if you were to go to the market now, ask them very directly, what would you like to see? Not with the idea that you'll just randomly copy or suddenly start doing what they say, but internalize it and see if it makes sense, right? And if it resonates with what you believe you should be doing, do it and then go back to them and say, hey, you know what, I have delivered what you asked.
So, just one last.
So, software question. So you travel a lot, I assume, in your work, right? So do you see any specific traits for entrepreneurs from a particular city? For example, I mean, just thinking out loud, right? Can you take some cities and like go across the traits the founders from those cities have?
Cities.
Yeah.
So it also varies depending on the ups and the highs and lows of the investor sentiment and the funding in the segment. Let me elaborate. So, for example, back in 2014 and 2015, it was unreal in Mumbai. Right now, nothing happens in terms of funding activity or entrepreneurship activity. But back then, Ola used to be in Mumbai. Housing was a super hot firm. Tiny Owl was a super hot firm. And there were a bunch of other firms, all people who were either just graduated from IIT Bombay or dropped out of IIT Bombay or working in housing or working in Ola. So it used to be, I must say, a very surreal experience. In many cases, there would be these idea stage firms, literally two founders, literally an idea, and not ready to talk to you unless you're ready to commit $1 million to them within a week. Right? All this has actually happened in India. They are not looking up arbitrary examples from Silicon Valley. Right? I have seen such days myself. Thankfully, although I see some signs of it right now again, I must confess, I think we are in early stages of a bubble right now, in certain stages in India. But for example, that was a very peculiar Mumbai-centric phenomenon I saw, right? Where because of Ola and housing, it had a very weird culture to it, right? Which I still haven't seen, since 2016 I haven't seen in any other city, nor have I seen in Mumbai. But in those 2 years, it was a very fascinating case study in Mumbai.
Can I extrapolate it to global countries in terms of US, Europe and founders in India? No, I'm just asking in terms of a global ecosystem context. If you look at founders globally versus founders in India, extrapolating the same question. How do you find
So, look, I think it's also a function of, and which is both a reality but also slightly unfortunate. What you get to hear from founders is also a function of the relative maturity of the funding ecosystem or the startup ecosystem there. So, for example, the way we interact with firms in India is extremely different from how you interact with firms in Silicon Valley. So, in Silicon Valley, you first need to start selling yourself as a firm. Otherwise, they won't even entertain a coffee with you, right? Whereas in India, leaving aside again, for instance, what was happening in Mumbai in 2014 and 2015, it is very much the other way around, right? Where if you call yourself out as a VC firm with, let's say, a reasonable track record, reasonable credibility, you can get a decent share of meetings without being accountable to the firm, right? In terms of levels of savviness, of course, it varies a great deal. So, actually, also that's also a function of many other investment themes. Like I think Bangalore, for the most part, as I'm sure you all expect, is the most well-rounded in terms of people having enough resources to know what to say in certain situations and having access to mentors and so on. And Delhi is right there as well. I think in Hyderabad also, for instance, I see very high-quality people, but perhaps missing out on occasion because they just don't know who to hear from or somebody to give them the last piece of advice on how exactly to position certain arguments in certain scenarios, which I think is just a matter of time, to be honest with you. Right? So,
can you talk a bit about your book? Because it's a very different scope.
That's a very abstract question.
Like, what do you
want me to give you like a free audio version?
No, what are some of your insights? Because I think you have interacted on both sides. You've been on both sides of the coin, right? Being entrepreneur as well as the investment side. So, can you share some snippets or some learnings that you had? Or why should they even check out the book?
The title is very interesting.
Title, yeah.
Yeah. So look, so I think the genesis of the title was very much that I think both sides have assumptions and beliefs about the other side, and both sides want to sort of be together in a relationship, if that's the right term to use in this context. But they always have preconceived notions, which leads to unnecessary friction, right? I think the idea, or the themes I explore is more around figuring out the underlying motivations and incentives, how to conduct yourself in certain situations, how to take a pause and reflect on what the other side might be thinking about, which, if you think about it, is not very different from what you would say in general, in a professional or for that matter even in a personal context. but giving more details. Sorry, would I request you to just silence that once and for all? Yeah, thanks. Providing more details and personal context on how to deal with these scenarios, right? For example, the reason I alluded to what you described as rejection and how to deal with it, I think there's an entire chapter dealing with it. Rejection from both sides. It's not always the case that, for instance, we make an offer and the entrepreneur also laps it up, right? It can happen the other way as well. It's very similar to how even in a dating context or relationship context, we also need to deal with rejection there, right? So drawing parallels there on how to treat the other side with empathy and how to use that rejection, if rejection is even the right word, to make a very positive change in your journey as a founder, or for an investor to also upgrade their ability to interact with founders. So,
I have a couple more questions. Do you want it?
We look there
We
for
just ask each of your questions. Let's see if we can grab questions too.
So
Because
I just wanted to
we
know.
have another 10 minutes left. So just
Sure.
Okay.
Please go
That's
ahead.
up to you. So considering Fundamental is a focused fund, and you showed us the 3 waves, right, the orchestrated waves. Can you give us like a ballpark figure of how many firms actually come in through the funnel and how many make it out to the end of the orchestrated waves?
Okay. Look, so I think it's still very early days for us. I'd say as of today, the number of qualified opportunities, number of deals, which is different from how many show up, for instance, at our gates. So the number of qualified opportunities to the number of, deals we actually do would be 1:25. If I were to project it outward to how many we see versus how many we do, I suspect it would be in the range of 1:50 to 100 maybe. To give you an example from my past, so I managed 15 investments but led 9 of those directly. 6 of those were more inheritances post the deal was done. And I had personally met, I think, around 1,500 startups. To meet 1,500 startups, I think I had received maybe 5,000-6,000 pitches, if not more, which led to 9 closed deals. So you could either describe it as 1:700 raw proposals received, or 1:150 meetings. In other words, if I meet 150 firms, invested in one. So that was the ratio.
In Fundamental, what's the size of investments which you look at, basically from your investment philosophy perspective? And seeing that you're very comfortable with co-investments. Is it a strategy per se for Fundamental going forward from your key capital days?
Very insightful question. I see you've been very diligent. So,
I'm an LP.
You're an LP?
Yeah.
If I may ask, like, what sort of funds have you been in LP in?
Governance Angel Fund.
Okay.
Arthuveda, IFS Milestone,
Okay.
Arthuveda Private Equity, Shriram, Homigo.
Oh, you've invested in Homico as well?
Yes, Carpe Diem.
Okay. So I'll come knocking at your door maybe
No.
maybe later on and go back with a few bags of.
I don't know
Sorry, I didn't mean to trivialize your observation, but it's a very good observation. So in Fundamental, per check, as of from the first fund, we can write up to $3 million US per check. It's an excellent observation you made about co-investing. So our view is, because we are a first fund and today working our way up, of course, building a brand name, credibility, network, and so on and so forth. While we will do our best to source the best deals, we can't put additional filters. Like, for instance, in my past, we had filters around getting a board seat, getting a certain ownership, and so on and so forth. You being an LP, of course, know how these things work. In Fundamental, we've decided, if we've decided we like a deal, we'll do whatever it takes to get in. Right? If we can get a board seat, cool. If we can't get a board seat, that's also fine. If we get to lead it, great. If we don't get to lead it, no problem. Right? If we even get like a tiny sliver of equity, we'll take it. Because our idea is, from the first fund is to make sure we have earned our place at the table. Once we earn our place at the table, from our second fund, we'll call the shots.
That leads to the next question. What's your annual portfolio?
It's too early to say. We are less than a year old.
No, from your earlier days.
Oh, that is a very long list. That is a very long list. So, are you asking me personally of the deals I've seen, or CoKarma?
You personally.
Okay, so
Because that's going to lead to what you were talking about.
okay. So the one which, in full disclosure, I wanted to do, but I couldn't do enough to convince our partnership to do, is this firm called Kisht. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. Sigtuple. Again, recently announced a round. It's an AI firm for healthcare. Meesho I had seen, although I was not leading the deal there in Meesho. We never got to see share chat, which depending on your perspective may or may not count as anti-portfolio.
I think in the networking session you can continue that. One last question I just wanted to carry on.
But that's a very long and very illustrious list.
Probably I'll go capture on that.
Invest in our anti-portfolio.
Anti-portfolio. A pretty good opportunity. So one thing is like until now we have spoken about investments, right? In the initial phase of getting investments. But what actually happens after a startup raises investments? Like how is the interaction in a VC firm, right, from 0 to 5 years after investment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's something that a lot of founders don't know about. What do they expect? What are the milestones? Or how is the interaction between the investors and the founders? Can you share some insight based on it?
Sure. So from what I've seen, at least, if it's a very young firm, let's say seed stage or earlier or pre-series A, what is ideal is monthly touch points or monthly reviews, which may or may not be in addition to, let's say, bi-weekly quick touch points of, hey, is something wrong? What is like the biggest thing bothering you right now? Are we on top of some of our key operating metrics and so on and so forth? And that is not meant to sort of police the founder. It is meant more also because in very young firms, the success of the firm and the success of the investor-founder relationship is a function also of relationship building, where the founder gets comfortable enough to share what is wrong with the team. Everybody is okay giving good news, but I think to get comfortable giving bad news takes that aspect of relationship building, which makes it a high-touch relationship, as they say. Once the firm is relatively more mature, which depending on the context may be post-series A or post-series B, what is perhaps more ideal is a quarterly board meeting, which may or may not have additional touch points, because then it's suboptimal to do too many touch points with trivial checks on metrics and stuff like that. But more important to deliberate in a very detailed manner in slightly longer intervals of time. Outside of that, of course, the interaction is meant to be transparent and humane. So the idea is not that they just prepare these long decks or MIS reports. The idea is also that you have a continuous dialogue open at any point.
We also talk about the terms of the board positions now, because a lot of them always when investor comes in, the equation changes, right? So how should each of them actually plan towards having such kind of discussions? What is the impact of bringing an investor?
Sure. So the aspect of having an external board director, let's assume for the time being, we're talking about someone from the VC side of things. It also means that in certain voting aspects or in certain ways of governance, the VC may get to veto whatever you have to do. Most professional VCs will not abuse that power, because they know that the first time we ever veto something which the founder doesn't like, that's kind of game over as far as the relationship is concerned. And it is also likely to lead to bad reputation within at least that founder's network. Unless, of course, something has terribly gone wrong, where let's say the founder has done fraud or materially misrepresented something, those are extraordinary cases. But leaving those things aside, most VCs will generally not abuse the power to be able to veto some sort of decision in the firm. So the way it typically works is for your reporting and wherever there is a more than normal use of capital or more than an extraordinary decision or a special decision that needs to be taken, you are expected to keep the VC board representative informed and get their, if not approval, at least their implicit consent, right? With the view that you're not creating a relationship that is built on friction, that it is smooth and you have mutual understanding throughout. Because the other way to think of this is you as a founder should also not abuse the implicit trust that a compassionate VC founder places. Because if he or she sees a pattern of you just abusing the trust they have in you, they might one fine day just use their veto power. And then that might be curtains for your true power in the firm.
So I think, you have a hard stop at 5, right? So
Yeah.
basically I think what I'll do is I'll kind of stop here. And we'll have 15 minutes for networking because all of you might want to connect with Shubhankar personally. So thank you so much, Shubhankar. I think this has been wonderful. Please.
Thank you for hearing me out and for your wonderful questions.
Yeah, I know it's not easy to sit for an hour and a half. And I'd like to thank even State Innovation Cell, Tarun and Sunny. I think Tarun was around, but I think
He's around a lot.
Yeah. No, it's not good stuff. Two Taruns are organizing it. So, and also CoKarma, Tarun, for hosting it out, giving us the space to actually do this event. Thank you all of you for coming down and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll do a photograph before we break up the networking.
For the marketing purposes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, all of you please come down quickly. We should have a group.
Hey, just to make things easy, in case you're coming to me for that, I'm not carrying my card, but you can take down my email ID if you want to reach out to me. So my email ID is shub, that's SHUB, @foundamental.com. Right? If for some reason you're unable to write that down, I'll share it with Tarun and Praveen and they can circulate it to you guys. Right? But I don't have any cards to share, so please don't come here and then get disappointed.
Tarun, ready one half. Just there. Please all of you quickly join us. Let's have join in.
Okay. Sorry, I'm unable to react. Just Thank you very much. Okay. Nice.
So everyone has to hug each other for us to put in the photo.
Sure, why don't you write it? Sorry.
Closer, guys. And where is the photographer?
Tarun, you will be joining us as well.
I will be.
Hi, Tarun.
Just for the photograph. Is anyone smiling? I see all serious faces.
Everyone should say fundamental.
They're all shocked and shattered after hearing all these answers. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Hi. Sure. Pleasure meeting you. And I wasn't kidding. Thank you very much. I'm heading out tomorrow. Okay. I have met Sunil before. Sorry, which were the other ones you mentioned? Yeah, yours is Sunil. I have exchanged mails with Dinesh and Mark, but never met them. In Bangalore, right? No, they are. Then what was that? Oh, I'll make some more. Thank you very much. Certainly. Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you. Why don't we connect your email and see what happens? Okay, my apologies. There's a lot of requests which are by default access. I don't process these requests. No, I'm based in Berlin, but I keep coming to India usually once a quarter, also Singapore once a quarter, and so on and so forth. So, as a firm, we are open to most parts of the world. Me personally, so at this point, one in India, advanced stages with different firms in Singapore, and one in Australia. But those are those investment countries.
So, my one of the challenges is like I'm trying to build a global firm, which is can actually but I'm not really sure of how this is because
yes and no. It depends on what you're solving for.
So I so documentation has an answer because I feel that documentation things I think is really important. And I solve many different problems because the documentation has any documentation is created on the one sentence like that. And it's implemented and everything else. So and it can be defined so that I'm trying to build this.
Like I expect something coming out.
So
See, the way you articulate last minute or so, probably not, because you would demand at least some kind of functional focus. So it need not be sector focus, but at least yeah, so it need not be sector focus, but at least so and given the industry we focusing on, perhaps more inside of something like kind of problems they face, that sort of thing. Okay. Sure, certainly. Thank you. Hi.